John Steenhuisen says that the party will today file papers in the High Court challenging the rationality of three separate lockdown-related issues, namely the night curfew, the ban on e-commerce or online shopping, as well as the restriction on exercise hours. Now, to discuss this further, I'm joined via Skype by DA leader, interim leader John Steenhuisen. A very good afternoon to you, Mr. Steenhuisen. Thank you so very much for joining us here on SA Today.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
Just as a start, the DA is challenging what it calls irrational lockdown rules. What do you believe to be so irrational? I know that there are three major issues that you're challenging at this point. Please, can you go through them for us so we can understand what the actual issue is?
Well, rules and regulations should be applied that make sense in terms of combating the virus and dealing with the health pandemic. Many of these regulations that have been published by government over the course of the last few weeks, unlawfully so, I believe, have absolutely no impact on fighting the virus and are there to make the security services' lives better and to make fuel the power trip that a number of the ministers are on. So it makes absolutely no sense, for instance, from a health perspective, to push every South African in the country onto the streets for a limited 3-hour period, which by effect of winter is essentially an hour or an hour and a half. Secondly, there's no need to have a military curfew in place. There was no military curfew under the lockdown level 5. And thirdly, there is no rational reason from a health perspective why e-commerce should not be allowed. It is the safest way for consumers to buy products without leaving their homes, without having to stand in crowded shopping centers, without having to exchange money or cards and tap into keypads and interact with products and other goods in the store. It therefore is irrational for government to say, oh, well, it's unfair to other businesses. Well, that's like saying that cell phones were unfair to landlines or that the motor vehicle was unfair to horse-drawn cars. It is the way the world is moving, and government's draconian clampdown on e-commerce makes absolutely no sense. We're also launching tomorrow another action against the Disaster Management Act and the constitutionality thereof, because there is no provision in the Disaster Management Act for oversight by Parliament of the work that is being done by the NCC. It is simply unconscionable that a NCC can make laws and regulations with absolutely no oversight or input from the legislative arm of South Africa represented by Parliament.
Yeah. One can understand you, on the issues that you mentioned regarding e-commerce and online shopping. But of course, there is the issue that you're having with exercise times and regulations, as well as the curfews, the lockdown regulations that have been put in place so that people can adhere to social distancing. You would have seen a week or so ago that there was a video showing when people were allowed to exercise, that people were coming quite close in proximity to each other. And that was in the Western Cape. That was in Cape Town that we saw those visuals. The fact of the matter is that we're dealing with COVID-19. We're dealing with this virus. We've never been in this situation before. And one then needs to ask you then, if you're feeling that the government is not treating this properly, what would you have done? What would you have done in the shoes of the president? Because at the end of the day, we're talking about life and death issues, Mr. Steenhuisen.
Yes, but you think you're missing the point entirely. The reason that there was no social distancing is because you've got the entire nation out on the streets in a narrowed bracket of time in the day. Of course, you're going to have more people congestion. If you allowed citizens to exercise during the course of the day, practice social distancing, you wouldn't have that congestion. You wouldn't be dealing with the problem. Instead, you've got a government that's decanted every citizen in the country onto the streets at the same time. And yes, we are dealing with lives, but we're also dealing with livelihoods. And there's an inextricable link between the two. And just because that we're in a state of disaster doesn't mean that people's rights as citizens in a constitutional democracy should just be completely disregarded. The exercise ban is arbitrary. I would have rather allowed citizens to exercise, as they have been allowed to do in many, many other countries where there has been a lockdown, at suitable times according to them, but provided that there's a ban on group exercises and that social distancing is practiced. I think you'd have far less people bumping into each other and cramming exercise areas, because people would be exercising at the times of the day that are suitable to them.
Why is this issue so important to you, sir? Why is it so important that people must be out and about and exercising and all of this when we are faced with this virus? Why is it not more important to you the fact that people sit at home, stay at home, and adhere to the regulations, and then we contain this virus? This is something that we will certainly get over. And as the President did mention yesterday, we are moving down from the levels. We are at level 4. And he specifically said we will move to level 3. Why is this issue such a point to you?
The issue is important because it makes no sense from a health perspective. Like many of the other regulations, they are irrational and unreasonable, and they cannot be justified from a health perspective. It is also important for citizens' mental health as well as their well-being to be exercising. Now, we know that the virus attacks people with
matter if they're
comorbidities.
dead, sir. Their mental health won't matter if they're dead, sir. The fact of the matter is that people in the Western Cape are dying.
Diabetes and hypertension are both comorbidities that really affect the ability of the virus to be able to spread further. The more unhealthy you keep people, the more at risk you make them of actually being able to contract both the virus as well as other serious health concerns. Both these diabetes and hypertension are associated with COVID deaths, and not allowing people to exercise is going to exacerbate that quite explicitly.
You said that in the press briefing that you had that South Africans are begging for clarity on the way forward under the lockdown. Which South Africans are you speaking for, and which conversations are you having, and with whom and where?
Well, I'm having conversations with South Africans who are frankly fed up with the lack of information they've received from government.
Yeah, which ones and where?
Would you like me to provide you with a list of them?
That would be great.
What are you asking?
Yeah, I'm asking where are you having these which thousands of South Africans are you speaking to?
On social media, I host a twice weekly show called Corona Cast. You should tune in sometime.
I will.
And we have interactions with lots and lots of citizens who send through their queries. I receive a lot of correspondence as a leader of the opposition from citizens who are fed up.
So you're talking for those people that you're interacting with, not necessarily all of South Africans, because what you've said is that South Africans are begging for clarity. I'd need to know which South Africans. Sir, please let me speak. Sir, please let me speak. I've respected you.
Provide with a list.
You've said that you're speaking to South Africans. I'd like to know which South Africans you're speaking to, sir.
Well, would you like a list? I mean, if you ask the president,
if you can do that, that would be great. Because if you're speaking for the majority of South Africans, then I'd like to know that you're speaking for the majority of South Africans. When you say us, we, South Africans, who are you speaking to? Is what we're saying. If I look at social media, a lot of people are saying that there should be lockdown regulations to protect South Africans.
Saying they're not. A lot of people are saying that they're not.
But hence, I'm asking who you're interacting with.
By a government that's making decisions that have absolutely no basis in both a health perspective and a rationality perspective. But I'm very glad the president's got you in his corner, because he's obviously been speaking to you.
All right. I'm not going to get a rational conversation here, but thank you very much for giving us your time there. That's a dear leader, John Steenhuisen, joining us on the line there. Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate your time. Have a good day. All right. That's the dear leader, John Steenhuisen, talking to us there about the DA challenging what it calls irrational lockdown rules. All right.